Hang in there, it is!
Smylie Kaufman for 61. Wow.
I'm Smylie Kaufman, and this is The Smylie Show.
Welcome back to another episode of The Smylie Show. He's Smylie Kaufman, of course. I am Charlie Hulme, and we are still in the midst of the golf off season. Had a great conversation on our Monday episode with Michael Kim, just kind of catching up on the state of his game, but also some excellent suggestions about what he would do if he was the commissioner for a day of the PGA Tour, if he was in charge of the game of golf, that were very amusing. So go catch up on that conversation if you missed it, and also his thoughts on the reported changes to the PGA Tour structure that could be coming in 2026, the number of cards available, the number of Korn Ferry Tour graduates, things of that nature. And we're going to continue that conversation on a similar vein here today, Smylie, with Brentley Romine. He's a golf writer for the Golf Channel for NBC Sports. He is a college golf expert. And so we're just going to examine the college game to a certain degree. I mean, there's obviously a large impact, those Korn Ferry Tour cards, on the players graduating through the PGA Tour U program, the PGA Tour U Accelerated program. Also, some sweeping changes coming to college athletics at large that are impacting all sports, but specifically some of those sports that aren't football, that aren't men's basketball, that aren't these huge revenue drivers, and just how at a lot of schools that have college golf programs we've come to know and love and have these deep rosters, how there could be some big changes coming to those programs. So looking forward to sharing this conversation with you today and getting to the Brentley Romine conversation here in a bit. Where we have to start first, Smylie, was a piece of I don't know if I want to call this breaking news as much as it was just yet another tweet in the world of professional golf, that you were on a nice little bachelor party in Nashville over the weekend. And I think I was out on the golf course, and you sent this to me, and we already had the Michael Kim episode done. And we were like, oh no, this is, are we going to have to talk about this? Do we need to do an update on this? And I'll read that tweet to you first. This is originally posted by the Nuclear Golf account that we all know. The report is that the Sun in the United Kingdom is reporting a deal between the PGA Tour and LIV is close to being finalized and is pending final approval. Valued at $1.3 billion US. LIV will reportedly play its events under the PGA Tour umbrella and get an 11% stake in the tour. Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy reportedly played a major role in getting the deal across the finish line. And, of course, the kicker line on this tweet that I love the most: the reporting is yet to be corroborated by credible sources in golf. So, Smylie, the platform is yours. We quickly, maybe didn't believe this as much as maybe we wanted to, but just your reaction to this deal and why we should not be taking this at face value.
Well, just another quick Google search on it all. Front Office Sports, who I would tend to read their articles and believe things. Mm-hmm. They say a bit of the opposite. They acknowledge the British tabloid and said that maybe a little premature on that. As they said, multiple industry sources say the reports are a bit premature. So with that being said, it does seem like to me that the end of the year calendar, there seems to be a lot of emphasis and pressure to try to get this done at the end of the year. Knowing, especially from LIV's standpoint, they don't have a network sign on for next year. The CW, that whole contract is expired. So probably a bit of pressure from their side, trying to figure out, hey, where's this league going to go in the future? The antitrust concerns, which we are antitrust guys, since we had an antitrust lawyer on this. But it does seem that the government is the big holdup in all this. I know that we're recording this on an election day, but for instance, who gets elected could make a big difference in this. Yeah. It sounds crazy to say that, but Donald Trump I don't know what podcast he went on. I feel like these presidents and
with Jim Gray and
these candidates have gone on 7,000 of them that I can't keep up, but said that he could get this thing across in about 15 minutes. So why is that important to us? It's because we're a golf podcast, and we will have to acknowledge that, okay, if Trump is elected president, that maybe the antitrust issues that are being held up from the government standpoint become less of a problem. So With that being said, there may be more that comes out after whoever becomes elected. That's something that it's hard to believe, but that's kind of where we are in the game of golf. And that, but yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I think just a couple of things to follow up on the initial headline that are, to your point on the presidential, the state of the media cycle where we are now, where we have Donald Trump on a podcast with Jim Gray and Bill Belichick, and we have Kamala Harris on Shannon Sharp's Club Shay Shay podcast, where you're just like, what reality are we living in? What universe are we living in? It's akin to us launching this podcast back in May 23, and then several months later having Matt Stoller on to talk about the antitrust law in the United States and just the structure of this deal. It is a little bit surreal sometimes to think about the game of golf and where we stand. I think particular to this report, funnily enough, the reason why I was able to immediately debunk this is if you are a fan of soccer, international soccer, specifically the English Premier League, you know that the Sun is one of the most despised tabloids that exist in the United Kingdom. They've been banned by numerous teams from reporting on their matches because of some of the sensational reports they put out there in years past. So while they may have some rumors or details that they could be close on,
let's take their word for it, though. Let's play the little game of let's take their word for it.
I think that's probably the best place to take this. Is like let's just say that this is the shape of the deal, $1.3 billion deal. Much of which probably funnels back into the tour and is a make good for all the players who didn't go, who didn't take the money. The LIV getting a not insignificant stake in the tour, 11%, but also playing underneath the PGA Tour umbrella, which that for me pops because that was the initial reported shape of that deal, right? That all the LIV interests were going to fall underneath Jay's control, underneath whatever the new for-profit entity, not the non-profit structure.
PGA Tour Enterprises.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So Smylie, if this is close to the shape of the deal, do you like this for the PGA Tour?
Oh gosh. Yeah. Yes, we've got to come to some form of agreement. Whether I believe LIV is the correct way to do it or not, it just has to get done. So I do think that a team element could work under the PGA Tour umbrella, and you've seen the PGA Tour try to come up with their own with the TGL. We'll see how that whole thing goes, and that's way different than what the normal golf product that they give. But what's wild to me in all this is how ratings and how many people are actually watching the sport, how much money we're talking about. It's pretty crazy, right? When we talk about a private equity firm, an SSG, pumping in $1.5 billion. And then you talk about the PIF doing the same. It just is pretty wild to me that, guys that hit a ball around a field can get, this much interest from different private equity. And then you obviously have the Saudis, but it seems like they're finally getting where they wanted to get in all this, which is a seat at the table in golf, to maybe whatever it's to, if you want to call it sports washing, you want to call it, familiarize the Saudis and American commonplace in business. I don't know, whatever it is, they feel like they got to spend money in golf, and by God, they have done it.
Yeah, and I wonder if there's going to be sort of a yo-yo effect here. Like what we do know is that in a fractured professional golf structure, there's no way that was going to be sustainable long term. And so we can talk about the ways in which either side had some form of leverage to wait the other out. That the Saudis have all this money, but they're not going to forever dump it down a black hole where they can't get a major television contract. I think that's another part of this that's really worth thinking about, is that all these guys, they signed to that first round of contracts for those terms. Those things were coming up again soon. So if they want to continue to have some form of leverage, they were going to have to pay another large sum of money to keep that player there on the LIV Tour. So there were, of course, a lot was reported on the PGA Tour side of things of, why they didn't have money to continue fighting against the PIF, and that at some point they were going to have to kind of bend their will and bring them in. But there were similar considerations on the Saudi side in terms of how long do we want to prop this thing up if it's not going to blossom in the league we wanted it to be. I think I just feel like in some way, shape, or form, there's going to be a yo-yo effect or rubber band effect here where this thing has to get right-sized in terms of what it's actually worth. I don't know why this is the example that I'm thinking of in my head, but I think of like salary scaling for NFL rookies going back to the where they didn't have the salary slotting and they were getting these gargantuan deals for, $50 and $60 million guaranteed right out of the gate, and this wasn't sustainable. And then they went from that to an incredibly restrictive, like 4-year, $22 million salary slotting for rookies in like the early 2010s that also didn't make sense. And so I equate that in some way, shape, or form into the money that is being pumped into the game. Like now it's clearly too much, and I wonder if it's going to come back to a right-sized amount once this whole thing comes back together, because it just wouldn't make sense for it to continue at this sort of rate. My questions next are more along the lines of, what would this shared ecosystem look like? Like if they're all under the same umbrella, if they're all under the same umbrella, right? It behooves both sides to support the shared product because they're, the PGA Tour, now lives under this umbrella. LIV has a stake in it. They should support both sides. So I wonder if the case is going to be that guys that are currently on the PGA Tour would want to play for a LIV franchise, and I don't think there's any incentive now to pay those guys some big sum of money to join that franchise, but maybe there's like an ownership interest and there are marketing lanes that are now more open because it's a product that's rubber stamped by the PGA Tour and it's under that umbrella. So that to me is my next set of questions. Is like, I think clearly what this does is it gets all the best players in the world in the biggest events, on a however many times per year, 15 times a year. But then past that, what does the rest of the golf landscape look like? Is team golf now a thing with PGA Tour players? I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
Team golf is definitely one of the things that comes to mind. I just think too about the PGA Tour players that have stayed. They're obviously playing for official world golf ranking points. They have an option to continue to work their way up in that, the legacy aspect of the PGA Tour. And, I think with a big risk for these guys going to LIV Golf Tour, well, they felt like they were changing the way the professional golf landscape was going to look. And obviously they took a big chunk of money. They don't get world ranking points. So if you're under that umbrella now, does the world ranking system start to become something that was ignored for a bit? The players were upset about this on the LIV Golf Tour. Now, is that something that comes back now that they're like, hey, whoa, we did the deal. Like, we're at the seat of the table.
Like retroactively crediting them for things.
Well, not necessarily crediting for them. Like, it's more of setting up a way in which it can be recognized, where players can get official world golf ranking points. Because I just don't see a world in which now these players can come back and meet. It still seems like they're going to, work in their own lanes. Now they're just not going to be working against each other. I think the organizations quite as much. I think they're going to have their lanes, maybe picking off guys. I'm not sure how that's still going to work. I assume that still would go on, but in some way, shape, or form, it all is under the PGA Tour umbrella. So as long as the big events are getting the guys that you want to get from the PGA Tour's perspective, they're like, all right, if the guy that's 38, 40 years old, who's just past the peak of their career, wants to go to LIV and play in that format, great. Because right now, you would argue that outside of John Rahm, Bryson DeChambeau, Cameron Smith, there's a group of guys that you want playing in the top events, but outside of that, and I guess this is the last piece too in this is that the huge difference, right, is players are playing stroke play. They're starting on the first tee. The format, we've talked about that, but the brands that these guys have on the PGA Tour that they create. Like, Jordan Spieth for Under Armour, him for playing the equipment that he plays. When you see Bryson now like he wears the same outfit every single day, and it's the same team outfit, and he's got other teammates that wear the same thing. And you work for LIV, you work for the Saudis, like you've got to do all of these things, which aren't the worst end of the world. Let's not act like this is awful. You're getting paid a whole lot of money to do this, but there's big differences now between what a professional golfer on the PGA Tour, the decisions they get to make, versus the decisions that the LIV Golf Tour players get to make day in and day out. So there's a big difference between some of the things that these guys can and cannot do now.
Well, and I think to take it one additional step and looking at like the pieces that are moving on the chess table right now, and I don't know how much of this is calculated, how much of this was already in works, but it seems not entirely coincidental to me that the timing of this letter that Camilo Villegas sends to the tour goes out and saying, hey, we're reeling back cards. We're looking at going back to 100. We're looking at kind of closing pathways a little bit. And, hearing Michael Kim come on the show a few days ago and talk about how, it's a lot easier to add cards back in than it is to take cards away. And so what are they doing now? They're putting a precedent in place for when these LIV guys come back. We don't just have all these free cards to hand out. And there's less of a leverage position where you can say, well, you're giving out, you're keeping 125 cards, you're giving 30 to Korn Ferry Tour guys and 10 to DP World Tour guys and another few to college guys. Surely there should be a way to let in, 24 of our LIV guys. Well, if all of a sudden the landscapes change, it's like, well, it's only 100 tour cards. It's only 20 Korn Ferry Tour guys. And it's kind of more of a closed shop, more of a tight ecosystem. Maybe the number of cards that you're willing to kind of allot for LIV guys changes a little bit. Maybe you have to send some of those guys back through Korn Ferry Tour routes or things of that nature.
It could be exciting it could be exciting. All of the things that have happened over the last couple of years, the changes that the tour has made, and just I think even too from a network standpoint, like just trying different things. All I think will pay off in the long run, just trying different elements, the TGL team thing from the PGA Tour side, what works, what doesn't work, what's worked from the LIV Golf League that you can maybe incorporate into the whole grand scheme of what you want to see week in and week out. But I think the way in which we're talking about this, which is I think a fair way, is I do feel like a lot of these things are checked off. I think they're in a good place. The fact that Jay Monahan continues to go and play golf with Yasser, go over there and meet the Saudis in person. There must be very strong communication of the fact that, like, how can we get this through the DOJ? So, hey, let's say that an elected official, Trump, gets elected and said, hey, well, I'm going to push this through. We could be in a place now where 2026 becomes much more of the new golf, like what we're going to expect to see over the next couple decades, right? Like there's been so much change every single year since all this got started. And we may be getting closer to, and this is the year I think we've all heard, and Adam Scott said it, other players have said it, that 2026 was always going to be the target year. So next year is going to be another bridge year. The tour's already got their schedule out. The LIV Golf Tour's only put out 4 of their events, which is hilarious that every year it's like Brooks is going to be sending the tweets like, hey, let us know when you got the schedule. Like I got to play in all of them. So it'd be nice to know where I'm playing. But
it's the TGL point I think is really interesting that you make, Smylie, because if you're looking at, how many 4-player professional golf teams do we now have in existence? It's like there are 13 of those over on LIV. There are now 6 of those in the TGL. Like it's definitely easier to kind of start merging ecosystems with, existing structures and branding in place.
Yeah.
Again, that's a moonshot. Like I have no idea what that looks like and whether if it's closer to a green grass product like LIV, or if it's like, hey, LIV guys, come play inside our brand new, SoFi Center that we just built down here in Palm Beach, and it's this type of product.
I would love to watch a PGA TGL team go up against a LIV team. Like that to me is interesting.
It'd be a heck of a way to drum up interest for that league. That a lot of people have looked at and said, is this going to be a thing? Like all of a sudden now there's another.
In 2026, it gets a little bit more interesting. Where
with all due respect to the match, like I can tell you which one of those two matches this fall I want to watch. And it's not the one with all like the random celebrities. Like I want to watch the PGA Tour versus LIV match. That's and a lot of people probably feel similar to me. So it's certainly, I don't know how close we are, but it was nice to at least see a tweet come across saying, could we be maybe a little bit closer?
Yeah. Well, I think where the PGA Tour is now, with how exciting this last year really was, with Scotty Scheffler basically and Xander Schauffele putting the team on their backs, right? They drummed up a lot of interest in a year in which people were as disinterested as ever in watching. But I tell you what, when you go out to these big events and you see the crowds that these guys are pulling, there is interest. It's close. Like, it's just a matter of getting people in the habit of watching golf again. And I think that's where we're kind of at right now, which is there's too many people that are like, you know what, I could watch golf, or I could go play golf, or I just don't like how golf has been covered. And so maybe those changes that the broadcasts are making to try to, keep people engaged and want to be sitting on their couch and make it an experience like it was for, my family as a kid, which is Sunday afternoons. We went to church, we went and hit golf balls, we came home, we watched the back nine. That's kind of what we did. So I think it's all about making it maybe a bit of a habit again for people to want to watch the professional game and make it to where it makes sense, where there's a little less golf. But when you are turning on the golf, it's a big event and all the guys are there. That's all the changes that they're talking about that we have been discussing over the last week since Camilo set out the deal, less cards, bigger events. I think we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's, it's just going to be, there's some things need to happen at a level that's far above these professional tours. We all watched the hearing. We know the oversight.
Did we all watch the hearing?
I think it was a fuller part of my job description at that point than it is now. So I watched a lot of that hearing. I didn't watch any of it.
Well,
I think the main thing is that I think that if this was left up to the golf governing bodies, it'd be a lot closer to being done, or it would already be done. And I think that's probably the biggest factor that's in play. And to your point, there's, an election happening. As of the time it's recorded, there's an election happening right now that could have a huge impact on that. And then past that, we'll just see where it goes. But, another wrinkle in the story. So I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that, Smylie, but I think that suits for now. So maybe we get right to this interview with Brentley Romine on the state of the amateur side of the game and the collegiate side of the game as the fall season wraps up there, and we take a little bit of break and we get ready for the spring season in college golf. So let's get right to it with Brentley Romine.
Hey guys, welcome back. We have Brentley Romine, college golf expert, Golf Week writer, joining us here now. We have Charlie here as well to help get this conversation going. And Brentley, there's so much going on with college golf right now, and you couldn't be more connected than anybody. So I think there's a good place to start here is we're going to talk about PGA Tour U. We're going to talk about these the Luke Clantons of the world, the Gordon Sargents, and those types of players. But college golf right now, similar to the landscape of professional golf, which is changing, it seems like every single minute. With college golf, just like college football, big time adjustments coming to the sport, roster cuts being the one that's, I think, is the one that's being the most effective for these juniors coming out, as well as players that are on teams right now trying to make a spot. So Brentley, first off, thanks for coming. Let's get straight into that though, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, guys. And if college golf wasn't considered the wild, wild west before, it definitely is now. Let's start with PGA Tour U, because I think this is now the fourth year or the fourth class with that program. And I think what the job that Brennan Van Dorn at the PGA Tour has done with this program, especially adding to the list of perks that these guys get. Now we have a PGA Tour card. We have essentially the top 10 get some sort of Corn Ferry Tour status, and the top 25 get exemptions through certain stages of Q School, PGA Tour Americas. I think when you can offer that much to these young players, it definitely eases some of that anxiety, especially that first year out on pro, or playing pro golf, because we've seen it before this program. I mean, guys like Brooks Koepka and Jordan Spieth like didn't get through Q school their first years. Now they were always going to be fine. They were going to get through. But, I was always curious to kind of wonder just how many players were lost by the wayside because they didn't make it through Q school, and then they go through a slump, and then they just can never get on the right side of the coin. So
Evan Beck.
Well, he's going to be just fine. We're going to see him in Cypress Point here in about 10 months. But I'd be curious to get your guys' thoughts on PGA Tour U, because initially I think coaches more so than anybody else were concerned about just how much of a distraction it would be. Mm-hmm. But I think now that we're in year 4, they kind of realize that it is really important. And it may have led to some players transferring from smaller schools to big time programs to play in the big point events to kind of get higher on that list. But I think overall it's like great golf takes care of itself. And, guys aren't really necessarily thinking about that as they get into April and May. They just know that if they play well, they're going to get the points.
Well, Brentley, when we talk about what you just said there, which is, players from the smaller schools, a Stenson, whatever school you want to name here that's transferring up to a top school, they are effectively, now potentially taking some spots of some other players who've been sitting on the bench. So those players will then either transfer down or just kind of remained on the team. But as we head into potentially next year, a big change is going to be that rosters will only have 8 guys. So the trickle down effect in this, and we see this at the professional level now, how it's affected how many Korn Ferry Tour cards are going to be, or how many spots are available at Q School. Everything just keeps on getting tighter and tighter and tighter.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to see just how many players kind of give up playing golf in college, because if you look at some of these top programs, the 9th, 10th, 11th guys, I'm not necessarily so sure that they'll go down and play for a Stetson or a Florida Gulf Coast. I think they're more likely to chase a degree because, granted, these big time college golf programs, a lot of them are very good academically as well. And a lot of them have, the environment that you look for with football and the fraternities and sororities and things like that. I think there would be, I would be kind of remiss to discredit, those attractions for like young college kids, because sometimes they know they're not going to play on the PGA Tour. So why go and play for and I don't want to single out a school, but why go play for a Mercer or a Georgia State when you could just stay at Alabama and play club golf or something?
Brentley, I've heard the argument made, and I know that Smylie disagrees with me on this point, but just that having a roster with 8 guys, obviously much tighter, that a knock-on effect could be that instead of having a big school with a really deep roster and a ton of talented players, many of which you will not play, that talent trickles down to other schools. And there's a greater, maybe a sense of parity in college golf, because there is those teams that wouldn't have had those players, that they're on the back end of a big school's roster. Instead, they're now the best player in the top 4 at a smaller school, and all of a sudden there's a greater level of competition. Do you subscribe to that theory, or do you disagree?
I think some of it, like I would give a little credence to that, but again, I think the bigger concern is with some of these mid majors is some of them might not even have golf programs. Like if they're having to share 22% of their revenue, which for the big schools is probably between $20 and $23 million. For the small schools, it's significantly less than that, but they can give up to, if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, they can give over 22% up into a certain point. But if these mid majors who have football are going to be focusing on compensating those players, football and basketball, there might not be room for a men's golf program. Now, golf is in a different situation than most because it's such a small roster size to begin with. So it's not like you're looking at a swimming and diving or track and field or sports of that nature. But so I think that's another thing. I think mid majors without football probably stand to benefit the most. A school like Pepperdine that doesn't need to worry about football, like they can now say, all right, like which sports do we want to be our winners? Where do we want to invest the most money in? Men's golf, women's golf. Like there you go. And so those schools could be all of a sudden getting, not only getting the ninth guy from Oregon, which, I think Pepperdine probably, there might not be a spot there for the ninth guy from Oregon, but, those schools can not only get some of these players trickling down, but they might also be more likely to invest in their golf programs.
What about NIL when it comes to all this? Who's somebody who's probably spoken with a lot of coaches, kids, parents, and all of this. I think when we talk about NIL, we think about the Shedeur Sanders, the Livy Dunns, and you see how much money they're making. Is it affecting these top junior recruits yet? Have we gotten to that point where the Miles Russell, the Tyler Watts, are these players now? Is the recruitment change compared to how it used to be with this NIL being a component?
Well, so I have to be careful because we know that coaches aren't supposed to be talking about prospective student athletes. But I think the very best example is going on right now with the Blades Brown sweepstakes, and several big schools are up for him. But it's tricky, and I know a lot of coaches it's provided or produced some stress because Blades Brown is going to demand six figures per year probably to get him to come to school someplace. And that's on the high side of men's golfers. I only know of probably two or three that are around that 100K above mark. I think most of your average Power 5 players are in the 10s to 20s. There's probably a good handful of All-Americans that are in your 40s to 50s to 60s. But Blades Brown, I know, maybe not for a fact, but some good substantiated rumors that it is going to be a six-figure deal wherever he goes NIL-wise. And it's tricky because this is a kid who's already gone to Q school this year, doesn't predict to stay more than a year or two in college, though, with the PGA Tour, you accelerated maybe that if he does well in the amateur events or earns some points for that, maybe that talks him into staying longer. But I think it's so much money to invest in just one player, especially one that's maybe not as committed to staying and contributing to the program long term, unlike maybe another guy like a Tyler Watts who you could probably get and he's going to play 4 years, or a Luke Colton or someone like that. And I don't want to discredit Blades because he's amazing. Like, he's a great talent. We saw what he's done on the PGA Tour already. He's probably going to be on the Walker Cup team if he's an amateur next year, invited to that practice session. So, but is he worth it? I don't think any golfer is worth 100K, at least from the school.
Now, Brentley, forgive me if my understanding here isn't complete in terms of where we stand in terms of athlete compensation, but I sense that if I'm still kind of confused, there are probably others out there that could use a sort of refresher on where we stand on this whole front. And so I think back to the early days of like Wild West NIL, where Quinn Ewers was getting, a big car dealership deal to go to Ohio State originally. They flipped him from Texas to Ohio State, and then he goes back, and we all kind of remember that era. And since then, there's been more of a regulation. And now we reach the point in time where, as we're discussing here on this podcast, there is a element of revenue sharing, of revenue that these universities are generating. That's going back to the student athletes. So my question for you is, especially as we look at the different profiles, some of these schools, and to your point, mid-majors that do have football programs, mid-majors that don't, what do you have a guess as to what percentage of the compensation for these student athletes is going to be from, the era of dealerships or outside businesses, that NIL chunk? What portion comes from the university? Or is that an understanding that I haven't fully, is that all folded into one thing at this point in time?
Yeah. So the way I understand it by talking to certain coaches whose ADs are kind of involved in this and know more than most, is any sort of money, like collectives as we know them right now, like the rules are going to change most with those. Like right now, you as a, Smylie as a LSU alum could throw money at the athletic department, and that all goes into this big bucket. And then the schools essentially out of these collectives can pay their players whatever. And it doesn't have to be fair market value. There's not a lot of rules around any of this right now. And I think the best way to kind of think about where things are going is that you're going to have each school is going to have kind of like an effective salary cap. Now this could change because there could be 3 more lawsuits within the next 12 months and we could be right back to square one, but it's going to put a salary cap in place to where all of the money given by the school to these athletes will count toward that 22%, and you can't go over it. Now there will be, from what I understand, I think it's PricewaterhouseCoopers that's going to be kind of handling this, but you're going to have a third party that's going to judge all of these NIL deals that come from outside. So they'll be able to determine and ultimately give a final ruling on if it's legit or not. So if it's, so if Smylie, if a car dealership wants to, if Smylie's in college and a car dealership wants to give money and have them do commercials and market and things like that, and it's reasonable, then they can do that and that won't count against it. Now, if LSU wants to get Smylie to go there and they go to a booster and they say, hey, like, can you give him $20K? Like, yeah, he could maybe do a commercial for a dealership, whatever. Like that probably wouldn't be within the rules and regulations of that. So there's just going to be, the best way to kind of sum it up is salary cap and what you can pay your players, and like actual guardrails on collectives. Now with golf, OEM stuff, Titleist, TaylorMade, that all wouldn't count towards it because that's, as far as I know, certain, TaylorMade's not paying a guy just to go to Auburn or just to go to Alabama. This isn't basketball.
Brentley, money's never been, too big of an issue in the college golf game, right? It's been about, going to school where you're going to get developed to give yourself the best chance to make it to the PGA Tour, going where past pros have been able to make it through. And that's where, a lot of these decisions have been made, but now money is becoming more of a factor where a kid maybe would be, a slam dunk to go to this school. Now, hey, this school is spending the most money, and this is where you are seeing some of these kids go to school. And we saw that in the college football with some certain schools that I won't name, that one of them just recently beat the Louisiana State University Tigers. That we'll just name nameless. But with that being said, the next step in this now is that we've have a couple of examples. Caleb Surratt would be a prime example to me of a player who was a no-brainer to me to be a guy who's going to make it through this PGA Tour EU deal, accelerated program. He was going to be probably one of the next guys to make it through. Another player too that comes to mind is Eugenio Chacarra. I can't. You would definitely know this before I would. If he played 4 years and graduated and then took the LIV deal, but I don't know how many years he did. I can't remember. But 4
years, but he had that extra COVID year on the table to come back.
With that being said, we got 2 guys though that have gone to the LIV Golf Tour, and it's kind of set a bit of a precedent and it makes these college players think about 2 different options now, where before it seemed that there was only one option. Now I think as some of these guys that are top college players, they see this as a potential way to skirt past, going to Q school and in that first year or two, not sure if you're going to have status and all the things that everybody else went through. They're able to go build a bankroll over at LIV, and then when they're done, they can go back and play the tour.
Yeah, and I would hope that these changes to the Corn Ferry Tour, et cetera, like fewer cards, I would hope that wouldn't deter U.S. college players from thinking about other avenues, because like I said, what PGA Tour U has done has provided like good pathways for these guys. And I'm not so sure like LIV is super gung ho and bringing all these unproven college players, because we've seen it. Like Chacarra is not even going to be is he a fireball or
he's going to be on a new team.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's not even like, they don't even want him anymore. And Surratt's like great player, but again, like you don't know what you're going to get with a lot of these guys. Now, some of it is marketability type stuff, like being able to get potentially a recent U.S. amateur champion, maybe from from Spain, that could be an option for them. But I just don't see LIV really trying to tap in, at least in their current format, where there's not a lot of open spots. I don't think the tour really views LIV as much of a threat as they did maybe a couple years ago when it comes to these young players, which is why I don't think they're going to open the floodgates if you're PGA Tour U and all of a sudden offer 3, 4, 5 PGA Tour cards. I don't think it's going to happen. I think they're in a good kind of sweet spot right now with what they're offering. And I mean, they've had a pretty good track record. Yeah, they lost Shakara, but Shakara was in a meeting with Ludwig, like with LIV a few years ago, and Ludwig chose the other path. So, I mean, again, I don't think LIV's as much of a threat in that regard as maybe some people do.
It's good to know.
So, Brentley, to kind of shift back to the tour side of things and looking at, the two categories in which we could see guys come out of PGA, the regular PGA Tour year standings, and of course PGA Tour U accelerated. Gordon Sargent already has his card locked up, and actually that's another question I want to get to a little further down the line. Is just the makeup of the Walker Cup team and the way those standings and those cards will impact that sort of team, especially as they've just had their first practice session. But starting with the regular PGA Tour U standings, the three that are near the top of those standings. Shout out to the heels, my guy David Ford, he's up there, and then of course USAM champion Ballester and Auburn's Brendan Valdez as well. Fall season's over. What sort of if you had to make a prediction right now, who do you think shakes out as the number one at the top of that list at the end of this next season?
Man, I do like the way that David Ford has played this fall. When you look at the 2 wins, especially coming off a summer where he didn't play that well, he had some issues with his lower back and his hip, and I think he was contemplating surgery there for a little bit. And kind of similar to what we saw with Austin Greaser in the wrist a year ago, things just kind of miraculously got better for him. And I think he's learned a little bit more about his body and how to manage those things. So incredible fall for him, but he's also 1-2 against Ballester in the fall. Ballester missed a tournament. Otherwise, he could have 2 wins as well. Hasn't finished outside the top 5. I think when you look at the race for PGA Tour U, it's probably the number one is probably going to end up being the player of the year in college golf. I think there's going to be a lot of overlap with some of those awards. And
that's
PGA
unique
Tour
too,
U.
right, Brentley? Like that's hasn't been the case lately.
Yeah, and especially because last year Jackson Coyven just had such a great year. Like you've always had some underclassmen. Yeah, Clanton. But now you have 2 seniors here who have kind of ran away from the pack a little bit, and we have a lot of golf left. I mean, teams are playing 5-6 times before their conference championships in the spring. Like someone could come out of nowhere, maybe a guy that's been a little bit sleepy this fall, like Clanton or Jackson Coyven, or even Brendan Valdez, who's in the running for that number 1 as well. I do think, speaking of rarities, Smylie, by the time we get to San Diego here in late May, like we're going to have a PGA Tour U race that's not going to be already over. Like the first few years, it's been kind of a formality for Michael Thorbjornsen, for John Pak, like those guys, it's already been over mathematically. So I think it's going to be a lot closer. But I do think that the player of the year is probably going to be Jose Ballester from Arizona State. I think he's just at a different level, like what we saw at Hazeltine, winning the USAM, how he's been able to translate and kind of come into college and then actually fly to Spain, play a DP World Tour event, and then come back and not miss a beat at the Williams Cup and finish top 5. Like he just does things like I think across the board that a lot of guys in college golf right now can't really say.
And just PGA Tour U, the accelerated program. I want to talk a little bit about Gordon Sargent because I think it was widely considered a no-brainer for him just to go ahead and turn pro and not return for his, I believe, junior season. So for you, as somebody who's covered, college golf and now has this accelerated program, you see a guy like Gordon Sargent come back. Just overall, was that a surprise from everyone that's, the top teams, the top players? I think there was a lot of conversation on should or should he not come back. And ultimately, it only comes down to what Gordon thinks he should do as far as if he's ready or not. But was that a bit of a surprise to you?
when he announced it, I think it was more of a surprise than it is now, hindsight 2020. And certainly at the Masters 2 years ago, if someone was to tell you that he'd have a PGA Tour card in his pocket for summer of 2024 and he's not going to take it, you'd think like that person had three heads, because I mean, he was by all accounts the can't miss kid of that Masters. I remember he played a practice round with Rory and Brooks, I think on a maybe Tuesday. And I know Rory, like later that evening, was telling some members of the media that he was so impressed with like the way Gordon controlled his spin with some of the shorter clubs. And I think as we fast forward to now, like the wedge game is still an issue for Gordon, but I think the thing that is bothering him the most, and why I think it was such a great idea for him to come back for an extra year, is just I think mentally, he's not ready for the PGA Tour right now. And what I mean by that is, knowing Gordon since before he got to college, I think he was raised in a way where like his parents never made too big a deal about him and his golf talents. You have a lot of junior golf parents who, and rightfully so, like think the world of their kid, but they're constantly putting them out there and putting pressure on him and things like that. And Gordon's parents, I think, did it the right way and never really did that. And the last year and a half, Gordon's been in this pressure cooker where he's got so many expectations and so many people expecting a lot of him. He's got people now, he's in contracts with people with NIL. He's got an agent. Has all these things. And like, I think deep down, Gordon just wants to be a kid and play golf. And so I think that's been the biggest hindrance on him, is just feeling like he has to go out there every time and not only win for himself, but win for all these other people. And that's why I think we're seeing some of these big numbers is because the mental game just isn't there. Like he'll go out and make 7-8 birdies. I think there was a tournament, God, what was it? I think it was earlier this year. He made like 18 birdies and shot like 8 over par or something like that. Like he was way down there. He's just making too many big numbers. And I think a lot of that is just, there's just an inordinate amount of pressure that I think is unique to him. Like not even Luke Clanton right now, I think has more pressure and more expectation than Gordon Sargent does.
On the topic of PGA Tour U Accelerated, something we've discussed at length on this show, just looking at the way those points are awarded. And this is no disrespect at all to Jackson Koiven, who's a phenomenal player who's joined us on the show here. But if you look at the points he's won, 11 of those are from winning awards. 1 is for making a team. And you go look at Luke Clanton's spread, and 10 of his 15 points are points he earned either for play on the PGA Tour or play in a major. And I know Smylie and I discussed here last summer when Luke was on, or just this most recent summer when Luke was on that run of form, of just maybe reweighting some of those points that are awarded for top 10s or top 5s or things of that nature. Is there, do you have a quick sheet of what you propose to change in terms of weighting performance on the PGA Tour that would maybe make this a little easier for a guy who plays like Luke Clanton did this past summer to earn his tour card?
So I think people at the PGA Tour are regular listeners of the Smylie show, because I think there's people involved in PGA Tour U that absolutely agree with you on these awards. Like I wouldn't be surprised at all, and that would be my big change too, is to take the 3 points awarded for winning the Hogan and the Haskins and the Nicklaus and shrink that back down to 2. But at the same time, like this criteria was made using past data as an example. And when you go back, 10 years and the only players who would have satisfied this criteria were Justin Thomas, Patrick Cantlay, and Patrick Rogers, like there's probably not John Rahm didn't even satisfy or wouldn't have satisfied this criteria. Maverick McNeely wouldn't have satisfied it. So I think they can lean back on that and still say like, you have to earn it. And I mean, again, Jackson Koiven's not to 20 points yet. Like he's at 17, but he could. If I had to bet, I would say he's still, probably plus 140 or plus 150 to satisfy accelerated. I think Luke Clanton is maybe plus 200, plus 300 because he's only got a semester left to earn 5 points. So unless he can get in some more tour events, which will be difficult because you're going to have PGA Tour members not being able to get into a lot of open events early next year. I think it's still I'm fine with where it's at, but if they want to adjust that and maybe give some points to winners of the Western Am or, a couple other of these big tournaments, maybe a point for winning Olympia Fields or something like that, I'd be for that as well.
Hey, does everybody start from ground zero as a senior for PGA Tour U?
So you have what's kind of like a shadow ranking. So basically, once your junior year starts, you're accruing PGA Tour U points, but you don't know where you stand until the summer before your senior year when they press live on those rankings. So
okay. I didn't know if a Luke Clanton starts exactly the same way as a guy who hasn't played it all for, let's say, Georgia. And then he goes out and he makes the lineup his senior year and wins his first couple events. And now he's at the top of the PGA Tour U thing. And now we have a guy like Luke Clanton who needs these points or has deserved probably to earn a PGA Tour card through the system. So I'm a big loophole guy on this whole thing as I continue to try to break it down as I disagree with how many points that Luke Clanton has, and that I think they're in a system that is called PGA Tour U Accelerated. How we don't have more points available for when these players do play good on the PGA Tour blows my brain.
Well, let's also keep in mind, though, that if Luke Clanton for some reason does not get 5 points by the end of the NCAA championship next spring, he's going to start the regular PGA Tour U rankings with a massive lead on anybody
the question.
Else.
That's what I needed to know. So
because this past summer, well, actually, you know what? He's a junior now. So anything from after this year, 2024 NCAA championship would count toward that. So Luke Clanton would not be able to count his 3 wins from the spring, but he is able to count the 3 top 10s on the PGA Tour, which, there's not going to be guys who can count that in their average. He's going to have a huge lead over.
That's good to know. Good to know. All right. Yeah. All right. So as we move past all these conversations, and first off, Brentley, thank you. This has all been very educational for us in a lot of these aspects. And I do like a good recruiting scoop too. I always like to hear, who some of these schools are getting in some of these deals, but let's turn our page to the spring for this college year. Who's had a great fall? We know the Auburn team is really solid, but there's been some surprises. Ole Miss has been a surprise. Even LSU has been really great this fall. So I'm curious to think or see who you think will be the team. Is anybody getting past Arizona State or an Auburn at the end of the year?
Yeah, so I was actually sitting down. I'm going to write something later this week, just kind of recapping the fall, current favorites, things like that. And, I kind of struggled with it because, as you mentioned, Auburn's still really good and really deep. Probably haven't had the fall that they would have expected. Jackson Coyven has a couple finishes outside the top 20. And that just can't happen if Auburn wants to defend its national championship. You mentioned Ole Miss. I just spoke to Chris Malloy a couple of days ago. And they're certainly riding high. I think Cohen Trolio, if there was a comeback player of the year award in college golf, he's probably the front runner for that right now. Just because he was in the depths of it at LSU and forgotten about. And I'm really surprised. I didn't think he would get back on the horse and have 2 or 3 top 10s like he has already this quickly. So kudos to him. But I really think Arizona State is the team to beat because their one event where they really weren't in real contention was when Ballester was over in Spain playing on the DP World Tour. So Preston Summerhays hasn't had the type of fall that you would expect out of him. I think he's only going to get better and play more like the first team All-American that he is. Connor Williams is a guy, a kid out of San Diego who probably was overshadowed being in the same class as Wenyi Ding, but Ding's gone now and Connor's had more opportunity to kind of step up and show the player that he's about. So I really think Arizona State right now would be the team that I would put money on. Oklahoma is deep as well, but Andrew Goodman didn't make the lineup. They still end up winning out in Hawaii yesterday, 3 wins in the fall. I just think there's something to be said when you have a deep team, but you don't have that clear-cut number 1 or number 2 guy. I think sometimes you get into a situation where you're trying to have it be too much of a meritocracy later in the spring, and perhaps you leave a guy at home who could be the difference in you making match play or not. I think they get to match play, but I don't think they have the Bias Stare or the Jackson Coiven to really lean on like some of these other favorites.
And last question here, are you kind of, where do you stand on, the national championship staying in one location? It was at La Costa. It's going to be there. It's in San Diego. It's in prime time. I know TV probably makes a big call in all of this, but gone are the days where they just travel to the best golf courses.
Yeah, I probably I've been to like 10 or 11 national championships now. And to me, like, some of the best ones were always on campus courses. Like you look at 2018 Oklahoma State and Oregon in 2016 with Solomon Raza making the putt, and Van Williams, who was the assistant at the time, just like being basically a mascot, and the green storming and all that. I mean, I know Riv wasn't necessarily a campus course, but it was so cool to be able to see a major championship layout.
Right.
And obviously, like, the stars showed up for that with Jordan and Justin, and even the Kent State team with Connors and Hughes and Pendy. But I think sometimes it's more important to kind of look at the bigger picture, and probably the fact that college golf and in terms of TV, like, that's the next step, is just being able to increase the exposure. And I also think, we talked about this revenue stuff and where the NCAA is heading, and it's expensive to not only host a golf championship, but also host one that's on TV. Like, it costs a lot of money. And I was talking with Coach Fields last week. I call him up, talk to him every few weeks or so, and he was sharing with me that it's probably to host it right, it probably costs about $3 million a year right now for both men's and women's. And what they're working towards with this college golf foundation is to be like fully funded, like to not have to rely on the NCAA to foot the bill. And if they can do that, and the one caveat is it stays in San Diego, then I think that's a good trade-off. Like, yeah, I wish we could have it move around and be on some different golf courses, but at least it's a good golf course. I mean, the job that Gil's done with it, and look at the most popular golf tournament in the world, the Masters. Like, yes, it's Augusta National. That's probably why it's such a big deal, but you also have records, you have iconic shots, you have all that stuff. And that's something to be said too.
It's a good point, because when I think about iconic shots, I think about Inverness. Was it Bronson Burgoon with Texas A&M hitting that big shot?
First year at match play, yeah.
Yeah, there's iconic shots, but they were hit all on different golf courses. So that you make a great point there with La Costa. So
it's a pretty sick comp there too, to compare Gil Hance's Omni La Costa redesign with Alistair McKenzie's Augusta National. That's put that one up on the board right there.
Yeah, all right. I mean, hand up, a little bit blasphemous, but I really do think Gil's done a great job. My one qualm is the fact that, and this is one of my biggest gripes about golf course design, is when there is no coming back to the clubhouse after 9 holes. So from a coverage standpoint and a reporting standpoint, and when you have split tees and teams finishing all the way like 3 miles away, that's an issue for me. But I realize that's how golf started.
We're gonna put that on the media complaint list, and we got a whole bucket of lists on our end over here.
Yes,
so we'll just add it. We'll add Brentley's media complaint. But Brentley, thank you, man. I appreciate you. This has been very educational, and I feel like we kind of know where we're at right now heading into this spring of golf. So I appreciate your time, man.
Well, thanks very much for having me. And November 5th, 2025, we could rewatch this episode and I can look like a complete idiot. So,
but you could be a genius. You could be.
Yeah, I could be.
A lot of upside, a lot of potential upside.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
See you, man. Well, thanks to Brentley Romine. That was a great interview. And Charlie, one of the things that we didn't really talk about with Brentley was a bit of the Walker Cup stuff. We had mentioned some players that are potentially going to be playing. They just held some practices down in MacArthur. So it'll be interesting. And I wanted to quiz you. Do you know where the next Walker Cup is?
Smylie, I'm just trying to think where I might be able to figure out where that Walker Cup is. Oh, right here on this flag that I have behind me every single day. I was actually so bummed we did not get to that part of the interview, because I cannot wait for this Walker Cup. And this is something that you and I have talked a lot about our tour plans next year, but I need to be at this Walker Cup with my son, also named Walker, and shoot some form of content there. Luke Clanton probably on this team. A lot of big names in the mix for this team that we could see at Cyprus, but like it's going to be a really fun one this year. So
yeah, you definitely got to go.
Yeah,
it's what I found interesting too is that there's going to be a good amount of guys that aren't going to be playing. Players that like Gordon Sargent, who they're going to go get started in their professional career, which used to have guys wait around for the Walker Cup and then turn pro after, but it's kind of like a new day and age in amateur golf too. It's like you play one, it's like, okay, that's enough. I'm not waiting all the way until September for when, a whole summer of playing amateur golf. It'll be interesting to see what team they'll have. They'll obviously be big favorites. And the one thing I wish the Walker Cup would do is I wish they went Europe as well on that side. And I think that would start making it a little bit more competitive, and you really start to get it's like a junior Ryder Cup, and that's kind of what I would be really interested in seeing, because years down the road you could say, well, these two guys, Ballister from Arizona State, he played Luke Clanton in the Walker Cup, and Luke Clanton won on the last hole, and it was the most epic match ever. And now they're playing in the Ryder Cup at wherever the venue is. I think that would be cool. I know they have a junior Ryder Cup, but it's not nearly as important or as iconic as what is the Walker Cup, which is the number one thing that any amateur players try to make.
Well, I think it's a governing body thing. And let me first apologize, because I just realized for our podcast audience, I just did some really good radio and not actually explaining. I was pointing at my Cypress Point Walker Cup flag behind me for everyone that's listening. That's what I was doing when I did that little extended
I didn't even think about it because I'm looking right at you. So I didn't think about it.
The YouTube viewers, they got it. They nailed it. So that's yet another reason why you should subscribe to our YouTube and watch the show there. But that's neither here nor there. I think to your point, because it doesn't make any sense. It's like, this is the elite amateur competition, and with all due respect to Great Britain and Ireland, you could use a little bit of depth on that roster. It would have been nice to see Ludwig Oberg on that roster. The Walker Cup is organized and run by the USGA, and the Junior Ryder Cup, of course, another PGA of America product. So there'd have to be some sort of perhaps negotiating, make good type situation there. But I'm wholly with you. A Walker Cup that is a junior version of the Ryder Cup, I think that the Walker Cup is already televised on Golf Channel, but that starts to become a very highly sought after television product.
Well, if I can just explain a little further on this before we close this out. When I look at the WAGR, which is the World Amateur Golf Rankings, the only player inside the top 11 that is not American is Ballister. So the next guy is Omar Morales. I believe he plays at USC from Mexico. Again,
he'll be in the field this weekend. Worldwide technology champion.
The first guy not being a great flag guy. We're just talking about Great Britain and Ireland. I mean, it's just, you got to keep going, man. I don't even see anybody inside the top 50.
Yeah, I'm trying to catch up with you here just to see, to just help you on the flag game.
I don't see anybody inside the top 50.
Omar Morales is at 12 from Mexico. Jacob Skov Olsen is Danish. So there you go. 13th world ranked amateur. He'd be on a Walker Cup team.
Never mind.
If it was,
I'm not a flag guy, apparently.
Yeah. Callum Scott. But Callum Scott will be on that team because he is Scottish, or I don't know how old Callum is, or where, if he's going to turn pro. But yeah, the point stands. Even in looking at this, I think that you get a little more depth on the Euro side.
Oh my god, yeah, there's plenty of guys. It'd be way better. But that's a bit of it's just a personal request.
I mean, I'm excited nonetheless to see. I'm excited just to see golf on TV. Well, I mean, I'm hoping to be there in person, but golf at Cypress Point, that's high leverage. It's going to be awesome.
Point. Yeah,
it's going to be awesome in September. Perfect conditions on the Monterey Peninsula. Very fired up for it. And hoping to get out there a little earlier too, to take Walker to the aquarium. He needs to go to the aquarium. Big ocean animals guy, as we've covered here on the show. So excited to hopefully get out there for the AT&T this year and do a little bit of that. So what do we got, Smylie? Any final thought? We have the Worldwide Technology Championship in Mexico this week. We'll be recapping that. We're going to do a little live stream on Monday morning following that competition, which I believe is November 11th. So if you have some time to join us on Monday morning, you want to hop in the chat, send us some comments, and catch up on that tournament, or really anything else in the world of golf you'd like to discuss. We will be there doing that on our YouTube channel and on our X channel, on our X platform. I don't know what the correct termage is there, but we'll be on X live if you want to talk to us there. But any other final thoughts you got, Smylie, before we send out our audience?
No, just got some big interviews coming up.
Yes.
Lots to be excited about if you're a listener to the show. So we got some good players coming up that I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy.
Yes, very excited about that. Getting back to some of the things we did this last fall, breaking down the game of golf with some of the best players in the world. So pumped for that. Appreciate you watching and listening as always, and we'll talk to you right back here very soon.
I listen to this podcast. It's really cool. And
all of our lovely fans and subscribers, but make sure you like and subscribe.
it's cool to see what you guys are doing. I know golf fans appreciate it, but we do too, so please keep it up.
For all the good people of YouTube, like and subscribe.
You guys have some good takes, so I'm happy to come on and shoot the